September 10th, 2019, a man was forcibly castrated with the use of a pit bull. And this had to be one of the most disturbing gang tortures ever caught on tape, but it wouldn't be the only one. Chainsaws. June 20th, 2020, a disturbing video started circulating on several social media platforms. It was of a man whose legs were brutally chopped off with a chainsaw. When El Chapo was arrested, the man who took over was even more brutal. This man is Ismael Zambada, better known as El Mayo. This man has creative, diabolical ideas for torture. It was El Mayo who ordered the kidnap and torture of the man in the video. But this was an intentional move, a message to all who dared to challenge El Mayo. This is because a new generation of cartels are on the rise in Mexico, and this generation aims to wipe out what is known as the Old Guard, which is headed by El Mayo. In response, El Mayo launched a campaign of terror to ensure that no one questions his authority, and this has included the capture and torture of members of rival gangs. Now, these tortures are recorded and shared online to instill fear in the hearts of those having thoughts of challenging El Mayo's authority. The man in the viral video is a member of Los Capitos. This violence didn't start with El Mayo. He simply carried out the legacy of El Chapo. In January 2019, the FBI confirmed that another footage of a different man being tortured showed El Chapo on the scene. We have the mob boss getting captured on tape participating in torture and interrogation. The areas affected by these brutal practices include the states of Sinaloa, Durango, and Chihuahua in northern Mexico, where the cartel has established its stronghold. The reach of their violence, however, extends beyond these states, impacting neighboring regions and the country as a whole. Reports indicated that it was pretty normal for people living in the areas controlled by El Chapo's cartel to see bodies beheaded with chainsaws littering the street.
De Najapa, la policía reportó que los cuerpos, los cuales ya tenían al menos 15 días de haber sido asesinados, estaban envueltos en 4 sábanas en el borde de un camino de terracería.
April 2024, in Puebla, Mexico, the authorities uncovered a car abandoned in traffic on a busy expressway, containing the remains of 7 individuals, 5 of whom been decapitated, 1 completely dismembered, and another bearing the marks of a brutal end. But even more horrifying than the sight of mangled human bodies was the realization that this was no ordinary crime scene. Each body was accompanied by a handwritten note, a chilling message outlining the alleged crimes of the deceased, from petty drug dealing to extortion. These individuals had apparently been judged, executed, and their bodies were put on public display as a warning to others. This grisly incident shows that dismemberment is still used in the terrifying world of Mexico's drug war, where cartels rule with brutal efficiency, meting out their own form of justice and leaving a trail of fear and mutilated bodies in their wake. Castration. September 2019, in what was alleged to be a cartel enforcing justice for a heinous act of sexual violence, a man would be tortured with a pit bull in the most horrific way imaginable. The victim of the cartel's justice system was a man in his late 20s, accused of raping a young woman in the community. The woman bravely came forward and reported the assault to the local authorities, but it's reported that she received little support and no action was taken against her attacker. It'd be several months after this assault where the cartel apparently decides to take matters into their own hands. In a gruesome and disturbing act, they lured the perp to a remote location under the pretense of discussing a business deal. It's here they set up an IG live session broadcasting the incident to a select few followers. What unfolded was a horrific and brutal attack. The live session, though quickly taken down, was recorded and shared on other social media platforms, with short clips making their way to even more mainstream ones. The recordings show the man being held down by several cartel members, while a pit bull's encouraged to attack his groin. The dog's clearly trained for the attack, goes for the man's throat, but is repeatedly pulled off and redirected to the intended target. Well, this man's screaming, pleading for mercy, yet it pales in comparison to the disturbing and explicit nature of the attack. The cartel members can be heard encouraging the dog. The recording continues for several minutes, with the man's cries becoming weaker as the dog does its work, ripping out his manhood. It's unclear if the man survived this, as the cartel hasn't released further information and law enforcement hasn't been able to locate him or his remains. 2019, we have another video coming out involving several men from Rosario de Tezopaco, Mexico. It was reported that these captives were tied up with their genitals cut off. The sicarios were on an operation to rid their turf of rival operators, and to send a message, they made sure this disturbing footage got circulated as a warning to their rivals. The horror didn't end with manhoods being ripped off. The hostages were also forced to eat them. Now, that takes it to a different level of barbarism and bloodiness, but this is the Mexican cartel we're talking about here, so they had to take it up a notch higher. To top it off, the heads of these unfortunate gang members were chopped off. The cartel, operating without fear in the region, has long been known to take on the role of unofficial law enforcement, often carrying out brutal punishments for those who break their strict rules. Face peeling. January 2010, the body of Hugo Hernandez, a high-ranking member of the Juarez cartel, was found scattered in several pieces across the streets of Los Mochis. However, that's not all of it, as there's more revelation to come. Face peeling is the new horrific tactic used to strike fear into the hearts of rivals and would-be informants. Now, this particular incident involving the infamous drug lord El Chapo is one that would not be easily forgotten. In 2010, there was a war between Sinaloa and Juarez that was led by El Chapo. Known for his ruthless tactics, he decided to send a message to his enemies that would send them cold shivers down their spines. The message began with the capture of Hugo Hernandez, a high-ranking member of the Juarez cartel. Now, Hernandez was a feared and respected figure, but he found himself at the mercy of his captors, bound and helpless. In a display of sheer dominance, El Chapo decided to make an example of Hernandez, and what followed would be a scene straight out of my worst nightmare. In a secluded location, likely in one of the many safe houses used by the cartel, El Chapo, surrounded by his loyal henchmen, brought out his chainsaw, the weapon of choice for his wicked display. As the cartel held down Hernandez, El Chapo, with his twisted smile, revved the chainsaw to life. The cartel leader then proceeded to slowly bring that chainsaw towards Hernandez's face. Before anyone could stop him, he began to cut off his face in a bloody mess while he was still conscious. However, he wasn't done yet, and the true horror was yet to come. As the face was removed, El Chapo carefully started fitting it to a soccer ball, stretching and stitching the skin into place, creating a sickening trophy. Now, this had to be a warning to everybody, so El Chapo said to put it in a public place where everyone could see it. The police would later recover Hernandez's face at the footsteps of the City Hall in Los Mochis. On the ball was a message reading, "Happy New Year, because this'll be your last." That's not all. Hugo Hernandez's body was cut into 7 pieces. His torso was found in one plastic container at a location, while the rest of his remains were found elsewhere in another container. Stewing. July 2013, the Mexican military arrests Miguel Angel Treviño Morales, better yet known as El Guizo, for a crime so heinous it would make anyone's skin crawl. Cartels have been known for their brutal and inventive torture methods, but their latest creation, as you'll come to discover, is particularly horrifying. They call it stewing, and it involves subjecting their victims to a slow and agonizing death by boiling. Mr. Morales, aka El Guizo, comes with a very dark origin. It was a name given to him because he was notorious for torturing his victims with guizo or stewing technique. He would receive this name because he would torture his victims like he would make guizo. When Morales, the alleged leader of the brutal Los Zetas cartel, was arrested by the Mexican Marines, what they uncovered was a chilling revelation about the man's capacity for evil. In 2010, Morales was responsible for the gruesome deaths of at least 72 undocumented immigrants, and as authorities have come to believe, the mass murder of 193 people in the San Fernando massacre. While the discovery was unpleasant in itself, it was the method of execution that truly shocked the world. Known as Z40 on the streets, Morales had perfected a style of execution that can only be described as sadistic. He would take his victims, often those perceived as enemies of the cartel, and subject them to a fate worse than death. El Guizo would oversee the placement of these unfortunate souls in a 55-gallon drum, where they would be either boiled alive or set ablaze after being doused in a flammable liquid. This method left no doubt that Morales enjoyed the power he held over these helpless individuals. The choice of liquid adds to the horror. Water, though seemingly less vicious, leads to a slow and excruciating death as the victim's skin boils and their internal organs shut down. Gasoline, on the other hand, provides a faster but no less agonizing death, as the person is engulfed in flames with their body burning beyond recognition. Feeding to lions and tigers. Heriberto Lascano, known as Z3 and El Lasca, was a man also shrouded in darkness and violence. But even in the filthy world of Los Zetas, his alleged actions stood out like the times of Rome. Z3 kept lions and tigers as pets, but these majestic creatures weren't merely for show. It was reported that in this display of power, Lascano allegedly used them as instruments of death, forcing his victims into their cages to be torn apart. To add to his twisted idea of fun, Lascano didn't let the spectacle go to waste. Instead, he would make a show for his top allies. Lascano fancied his compound to be the Colosseum and himself the emperor, providing that same entertainment the Romans had centuries ago. While his victims' identities were unknown, it's widely believed that they were likely rivals or those who had crossed the cartels somehow. The presence of wild predators, like lions and tigers, in the custody of criminal gangs will send a clear message of power and intimidation. It's a disturbing trend that has been observed in various parts of the world, often associated with gangs or cartels known for their violent and ruthless nature. Interestingly, the Mexican cartels have been associated with exotic pets, a twisted status symbol for their high-ranking members. One of the most popular examples has to be Pablo Escobar. Back in the 80s, Escobar established his private zoo at Hacienda Nápoles, smuggling in elephants, giraffes, and hippos. His obvious display of wealth and power included a public visit to that zoo, which not only flaunted his untouchable status, but also made the other cartels jealous to also get these animals. There have, however, been unconfirmed reports that Pablo allegedly subjected some of his offenders to mauling by these animals. There is another cartel with a penchant for exotic animals, and that would be Sinaloa, with its leader Guzman. Now, while El Chapo himself wasn't known to keep wild predators, other high-ranking members were. Ismael El Mayo Zambada, being one of his top lieutenants, was known to keep a private zoo on his ranch with some tigers and lions. These animals were reportedly used for entertainment, and just as you might have guessed, Lascano's reign of terror ended in 2012 as he was killed in a shootout with the Mexican military. Although after his death, authorities uncovered something new. Lascano's torture equipment was not limited to just wild animals. This guy would use dogs as well, or whatever deadly object he could find. Boiling water. November 2018, Mohamed Soroya was tricked into meeting on the pretense of discussing drugs. Little did he know that this simple invitation would lead to untold pain and suffering. October 2023, a Cardiff gang was arrested with their disturbing case of kidnapping and torture being brought to light, revealing the brutal and callous nature of the gang led by dangerous Fortune Lawson. Now, what sets this one apart from the other one we talked about is their use of mixing boiled water with sugar to burn their victims. But that's not all. The Cardiff gang also gouged out their eyeballs to control and terrorize them better. Now, their modus operandi involved abducting individuals and subjecting them to unthinkable torture to extract that ransom out of them. November 2018, Soroya was kidnapped outside his home in London by the gang after he was seen wearing a Rolex watch and a Snapchat photograph. The gang contacted him and told him they wanted to discuss drugs and arranged a meeting. Oblivious of what would happen, he honored the meeting but got the shock of his life. He was overpowered, forced into a vehicle, and then taken to an unknown location. Here, Soroya was tortured for an excruciating 8 hours. This guy was stabbed many times, his eyes gouged out, and boiling water with sugar was poured on his stomach in private areas. After subjecting the victim to untold pain, Lawson finally allowed Soroya to call his family to arrange for a ransom of £50,000 and the Rolex watch from the picture. After the payments were made, he was finally released. Soroya was found by his cousin and brother in a parking lot near a train station. According to reports, he was in severe pain and couldn't even get into the car. His brother and cousin quickly took him to the hospital, where he spent 5 days getting treatment for all those injuries, including stab wounds, burns, and cuts. In fact, again, he had to undergo surgery 3 months later. October 27, 2023, the gang leader, Fortune Lawson, was convicted of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and blackmail relating to 3 victims. He received a 25-year sentence plus 5 years, while the other members of the gang also received jail sentences. Acid baths. January 2009, Santiago Meza Lopez, better yet known as El Pozolero, which means the soup maker, was arrested. What they found out next was truly shocking, revealing a dark, disturbing world of cartel violence and the extreme measures they will go to cover their tracks. Lopez, a paid operative of Teodoro Garcia Cementa, a lieutenant for the Tijuana cartel, revealed to federal agents the step-by-step of his inhumane torture process. Lopez's chilling confession shed light on this gruesome practice of acid bathing, a method of torture and body disposal favored by the Tijuana cartel. According to Lopez, over 300 victims had met this tragic fate, while their bodies were dissolved in acid, leaving no trace behind. The soup, as Lopez called it, was a deadly mixture. A large drum filled with 200 liters of water, in which 2 sacks of caustic soda were added and brought to a boil. The caustic soda, known as lye, is a highly corrosive substance, capable of dissolving flesh and bone over time. The Fed's report laid out the horrifying nature of this torture and execution method, with the victims still alive being submerged in the boiling chemical brew so that their bodies would slowly melt away in pain, and you couldn't even possibly imagine what that would feel like. So in 2012, Meza Lopez was initially sentenced to 10 years imprisonment and was due to be released in 2022. However, many in the community and those in law enforcement appealed for an extended sentence. 2024, a new court ruling came in, giving Meza Lopez an additional 30 years in prison for kidnapping and his ties to organized crime. Teeth extraction. 2023, a man was peacefully sleeping in his house when trouble struck. What happened to him would leave a scar forever. March 2023, a young man at just 26 found himself in his living nightmare when he became the target of a vicious criminal group. Now, their intent was clear: to exert power, instill fear, and extract something, money or information, through violent means. 6 men, their faces all concealed and their intentions dark, broke into the man's house on Brennan Street. The man, still groggy with sleep, was forced out of bed, confronted by a terrifying sight of assailants, clad in dark clothing with guns and a sledgehammer. They drove to a secluded house in Belmore, a place specifically chosen for its privacy and remoteness. It was here that these abductors started their sinister act. First, it would begin with assault, as they beat him mercilessly. But their twisted, disturbing signature move was yet to come. They turned to the victim's mouth and, with gloved hands, forcibly removed several of that young man's teeth using pliers and sharp tools. Now, the gang intended to leave their mark, ensuring their victim would carry these scars forever. The aftermath of this horrific event led to the arrest and charging of 6 men, aged 19 to 21, for a range of serious offenses including aggravated breaking and entering, causing grievous bodily harm, and detainment with intent to ransom. In 2014, a similar incident happened in the UK, with a gang making headlines for their brutal attacks on rival members. Their signature move was to also pull out their teeth, often in retaliation or as a warning. Now, one victim recounted his terrifying experience, describing how gang members held him down, forced his mouth open, and yanked out several of his teeth with pliers, causing him excruciating pain and permanent damage. To make matters worse, the attackers were never caught. August 2020, Lisbeth Flores, a 23-year-old American woman, was another victim of painful torture. She was kidnapped and found dead in Matamoros, Mexico. Flores reportedly traveled from Los Frenos, Texas to Mexico to visit her boyfriend, but she was reported missing by her mom just the next day after she traveled. Before her death, she was subjected to physical and emotional abuse, including being beaten, burned, and having her teeth removed. The kidnappers also cut her scalp, as reported by law enforcement investigators. Teeth extraction is one of the oldest forms of torture and has always been popular with gangs, because it works really well. The practice causes not only physical pain but also psychological trauma, leaving victims with permanent scars and a constant reminder of their horrific experiences. Burning alive. It's a pretty sick and twisted world out there, where gangs even torture their victims to death by burning them alive. The leader of the notorious G9 family gang, known as Jimmy Barbecue Cherizier, has earned a reputation as a brutal and sadistic figure in Haiti. His name alone sends shivers down the spines of locals, with no one daring to cross his path. Barbecue had perfected the act of burning his victims alive and feeding the corpses to animals, earning him a sickening reputation that haunt the streets of Haiti. While there hasn't been a specific recorded case of this deadly act, Barbecue carries out this practice with chilling efficiency. He and his gang members kidnap their victims, often rivals who have crossed them in some way. Now, the victims are subjected to unspeakable torture, beatings, and humiliation. But the true horror comes in what lies next. Barbecue takes twisted pleasure in dousing his victims with flammable liquids, like gasoline or kerosene, ensuring that their bodies become living torches. With a strike of a match, he ignites the fuel, watching with a smile as the flames burn his victims. As the fire rages on, BBQ and his gang stand by, witnessing the slow and painful death of their victims. The heat intensifies, burning away flesh and bone, until finally the victim succumbs to the flames or goes into shock. It's a prolonged and agonizing death, one that Barbecue takes great pleasure in inflicting. This guy's sick practice of burning people alive reveals a disturbing level of wickedness. It showcases a complete disregard for human life and a real perverse enjoyment for inflicting suffering. As the gang leader continues his reign of terror, the people of Haiti live in constant fear, wondering who's going to be next to feel the heat of his fiery torture. Going after family members.
Opositores en la ciudad de Altal, a las afueras de Damasco, habría sido filtrado a la oposición desde una fuente cercana al régimen.
Marciano Chano Millán Vázquez, an alleged hitman for the ruthless Los Zetas, specialized in torture and feared no bounds. He knew many rival gangs were hardened and didn't fear death or torture, so he decided not only to target his enemies, but to torture their loved ones as well. Gangs intentionally kidnap and torture family members as a means of exerting the most painful punishment to their targets. 2015, Texas law enforcement breathed a sigh of relief when they arrested Vázquez. The courts ensured justice was served by convicting him on multiple counts, including murder and drug trafficking. However, the details of his crimes, as revealed by a brave former associate who took a plea deal and turned witness, are a chilling reminder of the evil that exists within these criminal organizations. Back in 2013, Vázquez kidnapped Gustavo Rodriguez, a former Zeta drug associate, when a shipment of narcotics was seized by U.S. officials. But his cruelty would know no bound, as he took an innocent family who was a relative of the offender, a couple and their daughter, hostage. Rodriguez, who would later provide a damning testimony, was blindfolded and taken to an undisclosed location. When they removed the blindfold, he witnessed a scene of pure horror. He saw his relative standing near a flaming barrel, and Vázquez, without pity, forced him and his parents to watch as he brutally dismembered their daughter with an axe. Rodriguez's testimony would then describe how Vázquez then threw the limbs into the fire. But his torture methods weren't completed. In this unimaginable display of cruelty, he repeated that act on the parents one after the other, putting them through the same horrific fate as their child. This calculated move was a signature of Vázquez's gang, as it was a means of exacting revenge and sending a message of fear. The witness further testified at trial that Vázquez was among the commanders who ordered the kidnapping of 300 people who were lined up and shot 40 people at a time. In the end, Marciano Millán Vázquez was sentenced to second consecutive life terms for committing and aiding and abetting the commission of numerous murders and other acts of violence, including drugs and weapons trafficking in northern Mexico, in furtherance of a drug distribution operation.